Sudafed? Check. Acetone? Check. Red phosphorus? Check. A high school dropout who likes to yell obscenities whenever he gets excited? Check. I know what this looks like, and I know what you're thinking. Is he in the basement of his house listing off the ingredients to make meth, all the while wearing a Heisenberg hat and referencing Breaking Bad's Jesse? Yes. Is this all in a pathetic attempt to make Miss Bausinger laugh? Probably. Is it working? I don't know. One thing I do know is that I'm digging a hole and I need to get out of it. And what better way to do that than to move on to the actual process analysis, which is how to make a stained glass window.
Step 1 of part 1 is getting your design down on paper. I recommend using graph paper because it allows you to scale the image once you're done. So if you want to make the stained glass window bigger or smaller, you can easily just translate the geometry on the paper and just make it, scale it larger or smaller. The other thing I recommend is using pencil, because if you draw in pen and you make a mistake, can't erase, and then you have to start all over. So I already did my design because I used that as the image which was required for the paper. So once you're done and your design is set and that's the one you want to do, I recommend going over it in pen. This is the design that I chose, and this is soon going to be a stained glass window. If you're a novice or you're just getting back into the hobby like me, you want to try to avoid contour edges, round edges, organic edges, shapes in your design, because that will just make it a lot harder when it comes time to cut out this glass. And for some edges you need a special set of tools and a certain life skill known as patience to do so. So avoid contours if you're a novice. 2 of part 1 is to make scans and copies of your inked design. This part is optional, but I highly recommend it for a couple of reasons. Number 1, it will allow you to have more templates that you can color on, so you can, shade these, color them in, get some different ideas of what different colors will look like next to each other, so you can have a rough idea of what your stained glass window is going to look like once it's done. And another thing is, the more of these you have, the lower the chance of you losing it is. And it will also allow you to keep organized and keep track of all your templates, and it will help you in the long run. So I highly recommend that you make scans and copies. Now, step 3 in part 1 is coloring. So I printed out 3 other templates in order to color on. I left one of them blank for the sake of this demonstration. There it is. And the other 2 I colored. And the one design that I like the most, its colors are based off of the cross design of the Knights Templar back in ancient Jerusalem. So that's what that looks like. That's a rough idea of what my stained glass window is going to look like once it's done. That's weird. There's another page. I don't remember having another page. Step 4 of part 1 is cutting up the template. Now obviously you're not going to cut up the template that has your color scheme on it, because this is what you're going to use for color reference as you're making your stained glass window. But you can just cut out the pieces that belong to the other colored templates that you didn't choose. And since they're all the same, since they're all copies, there should be no difference. And one thing that I love about these type of simple designs is, if you avoid contours most of the time, is that the design will be symmetrical. So in this one, it's symmetrical down the center. So I mean, you can just cut out half of these pieces and you just flop them over the other side and you'll get the exact same image. So what I did is I cut up the orange, white, blue, and red colored template that I didn't use. But the thing that I noticed is, if you're not careful enough and you're not using measurement tools, when you draw your first sketch, you come to the point where you actually notice that your lines on both sides of the triangles, like for the 2 right here, that obviously those pieces are missing. What you do is you just cut those pieces out and to that point, and that will basically prepare you for step 5, which is what is coming up next. So you guys got to look at step 5 a little bit in step 4, but step 5 of part 1 basically includes tracing the color template pieces that were cut out onto hard cardboard stock and cutting those pieces out, because these pieces are what you're going to use to trace onto the actual glass, because you can't trace paper. I mean, you can, but it's hard. So I'm going to do this, and you guys this is the final step in part 1. The cardboard pieces all cut out and laid, being put on top of their colored positions on top of the reference image. You can color them the same color as their reference image as the template, but that's completely optional, and I would do it because it helps with learning the process and it helps with memorizing your image. But in the interest of time, I'm going to choose to not do this part. But one thing you can do to really help is to take a photo of just this all together, the cardboard on top of the template because it pays to be redundant. Alright, so part 1 is finished. Now we get to move on to part 2. But before you can do anything, you need to gather your required materials. And they are as follows. Running glass pliers, copper foil, liquid flux, a flux pen, glass pliers, a brush to go with the liquid flux, your glass cutter, your grindstone, soldering iron, yardstick, and preferably one that has some sort of adhesive ability on the bottom. This cork prevents it from sliding on the glass when you're trying to cut. Eye protection, nose and mouth protection, spools of solder, and sponges, and also a little dish. You always want to have a little dish on hand with water. And the sponges are used for cooling down the soldering iron. So, now that that's covered, we can move on to actually cutting some glass. A little heads up about all the required materials. If you're buying these as a set, it can run you up to $400, so it's pretty expensive, but if you sort of outsource each item over a certain period of time, I mean, you will end up spending the same amount of money, but it won't be in the one lump sum so fast. So, heads up, it's a little bit of money that you have to spend. So here we are, step 2, part 2, acquiring the glass. And it goes without saying that you need to get the glass color that corresponds with your project color. So that's step 1 that you need to do. The other thing is that if the certain store doesn't carry your color, try a variant of it. Like if you're looking for purple and they have a lavender, try that out, might surprise you. Or you can order this glass online. And that's not such a bad idea, though you do run the risk of having it show up to your doorstep shattered. But there are certain companies who take pride in the way they ship and how they handle your items that are very reliable, and I just can't think of anything that's coming to mind right now, but I feel like the answer is close by. At this step in part 2, you're not really going to be cutting glass, but you still want to have your eye protection on, because if just by handling it, little pieces can flake off the edge, and if one of those lands in your eye, it can be devastating, so eye protection is a must. Now, cutting glass takes a bit, but before you do that, you have to trace on the pieces, but you don't want to trace them all on there at once. You want to trace them on individually, then cut the sliver, and then cut out the piece, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to show you the first couple of steps, and then that is just repeated over and over till all the pieces. So what I'm doing right now is the copper foiling stage of making a stained glass window, and it's really easy. You just pick up any of the pieces of glass that you have cut out that are with their template, and you just take the copper foil that you would have purchased, and you just take the edges of the glass and you place it on the inside of the copper foil. Make sure it's in the center, and you just wrap it around. And that's it. You pat down the copper foil and just keep on repeating that step. The last and final step in this demonstration is soldering, and you can only do this to an area that's been fluxed and foiled. So right here earlier I started soldering, but I want to do it to a new area, so this area right here I'm going to solder together. Now what you want to do is you want to take your solder, put it close to the foil, then you want to take the tip of your iron and melt it. And then, as it melts, slowly drag both of them over the foil. And now you don't always have to do that. I mean, you can see there's a bunch of big blobs right there, so I can just melt these guys down. And make it to where they look thinner. Yeah, so that's about it.